credit?
She is extra credit.
Oh, okay. Somebody's got to be in charge.
Exactly. And Morgan has got it all together. Usually, see, you may not have noticed this, but usually she works on Wednesday nights, and we get her for her lunch break in a closet at her job, eating instant mac and cheese or something like that.
Now that's dedication right there.
That's what I say. Yes. Yes. All right. Well, we may as well get going. You've probably heard by now that UMW is closing and moving to distance learning in all of its classes. Do you know what that means for us? Nothing. We're just going to keep doing what we're doing. You guys are in luck. At least I feel that way. Okay. I actually have a plan for every one of my courses for what I'm going to do, which means there are probably only 200 some faculty who are feeling heart palpitations at this point. Anyway, so we will continue. All right. This week we are still working on the production and cost module. So if you haven't had a chance to turn in your module analysis, you have until Sunday to do that. Now, all of you are the good kids, so I'm sure you've turned yours in. But it's those other people that still have a chance to do it. This is probably the most technical chapter or module rather, of everything that we're going to do this semester. Excuse me. So this is stuff that only an accountant or an auditor or something like that could love. I am not one of those people. So I feel your pain. So what I thought I would do is do a quick, basically a drive-by summary of what's in the module. I know Amy's all excited about that. So, yeah. Okay, there. All right. Well, we'll start with a question. What is a production function? What would you say to that? What is a production function? Amy, what are you eating?
Spaghetti with spicy marinara.
Ooh, that sounds good. Did you go out and get it somewhere?
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. Now that you're talking, what is a production function? Emily, you going to jump in here?
We're having technical difficulties.
Okay.
What is the production function? It's, wait, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Yes.
A mathematical equation that tells us how much output a firm can produce with given amounts of input.
Yes, very good. Exactly. A production function is an equation that shows the relationship between the inputs that a firm has to use and the outputs that it produces. Okay. I love those stars on the back of your wall there. I mean, that's you guys all over the place, I just have to say. All right. So we know that in the short run, at least one of our inputs is fixed. Typically, we think of that as capital. So if we want to produce more or produce less, the only thing that we can do is to use more of the variable inputs or less of the variable inputs. Typically, we think of labor as the variable input. So when we talk about a short-run production function, what we mean is the relationship between labor and total product, or labor and output. Emily, did you have a question? You looked like you were. Okay. Make sure you don't let that red sauce come out your nose. Okay, I will continue. All right, now a very important distinction is the difference between total product and marginal product. What's the difference? What does marginal product mean? Morgan is looking it up. Morgan, do you have an answer for us? Anybody else?
Yeah, it's the change in total product divided by the change in labor.
Yes, and what that really means in English is if you add one more worker, how much additional output do you get, right? So it's the change in output or the change in total product from adding one more worker, okay? Now, the thing about marginal product is it may increase at first, okay? The example that I typically use is, let's see, maybe I can draw it real quickly here. Remember, I was not an art major. Can you see this picture? Okay, so this is a crosscut saw, the kind that lumberjacks used to use 100 years ago. So if one worker tries to pick up this saw, they're not going to be very good at it. What will happen when they put the saw up against the wood and try to cut with it? It's going to go, wow. Okay, because it's bendy. Okay, so one worker with this saw is going to have pretty low marginal product. Okay, but when the second worker comes on board, all of a sudden they're going to go gangbusters at cutting the trees down. Why is the second worker so much more productive than the first?
Because it's a two-man saw.
Because it's a two-man saw, exactly. And often, typically that's going to be the case, is there's an optimal capital labor ratio, if you will, if you want to put it in sort of technical terms. Okay, so it's possible that at first, as you add workers, the marginal product goes up, but sooner or later, you're going to get diminishing marginal productivity. You're going to, for every additional worker that you add, they're going to contribute less and less and less. Think about it. What does the third worker do in a lumberjack operation? Two of them are holding the saw and cutting the tree. What's left for the third person to do?
Pick up the wood.
Pick up the wood. Well, these are really big trees, so it doesn't work that easily. What I was thinking is they have the oil cans, so they oil the saw as the people are cutting, and that's really important because otherwise the saw will grab onto the wood, it won't cut it. Okay, so there is something that the third person could do, but they're not going to be near as productive as the second person, say. Okay, what about a fourth person? What would a fourth person do?
Well, then you could switch off teams so that
You could,
fast.
but we're not going to allow that. That would be considered an improvement in technology. But anyway, if you've ever been in the woods, there are black flies, and black flies are monster flies. They are large enough to carry off small children, and they bite like crazy. If you stand still, they will land on you and they will make you pay. See, so what the fourth person can do is stand there and shoo off the flies. Okay, now that's an important job, but it's not a super productive job. Okay, so again, sooner or later, if the firm keeps adding additional workers, those workers are going to experience diminishing marginal productivity. Okay, why does that take place? Why is that a fact? Why does diminishing marginal productivity occur? Give you a clue. The answer is because there's only one saw. Okay, the more general answer is capital is fixed. So if you keep adding workers, eventually the new workers aren't going to have as much equipment to work with as the previous workers, and you will get diminishing marginal productivity. Okay, whenever you have fixed capital, that is a fact of life. Okay, any questions before we move on? All right, good. Okay, now, what is a cost function? What does a cost function tell us the relationship between? It tells us the relationship between how much output a firm wants to produce and what it costs the firm to produce that output. That is really important information for the firm to know. Suppose you're a government contractor. There are a lot of government contractors around, right? And the government has a job that they're looking for someone to do for them. Okay, so what's the first thing that you need to figure out as a government contractor?
How much it's gonna cost?
That's the second thing. The first thing is what's it gonna take for me to get this job done? What are the inputs in the production process? Maybe you're the manager, maybe you're not the worker. How many of my engineers working how long is it gonna take to do this project? Okay, once you figure out what it's going to take, then you can figure out what it's gonna cost. So you come up with a cost estimate and you tack on a reasonable amount of profit, and then you make that bid to the government. You say, I can do the job for $100,000. What happens next? What happens next is you don't get the job. Why not? Come on, any one of you can answer this question. Why don't you get the job? Kyle, what do you think?
Can you repeat the question?
The question is you're making a bid on a government contract. You say, I can do it for $100,000. You don't get the contract. Why not?
Because it's not worth that much.
No. The government needs to get the job done. So
Yeah.
if they don't pick you, it's not because it's not worth it.
Right.
It's because someone else came up with a better offer. Somebody else offered $90,000. Okay, they get the contract. How did they come up with $90,000?
Because it was cheaper.
Because their cost estimate was lower than your cost estimate. Okay, what if your cost estimate is really accurate and theirs was a guess because they didn't take Econ 202 with Greenlaw Online? Okay, their cost estimate was a guess. Suppose it really does cost $100,000. The good news is they get the contract. What's the bad news?
Well, they're going to lose money, but they're probably going to ask for a change order.
Well, yeah, let's not get too realistic here. I knew you were, Pam, I knew you were going to get in the way of that one. Yeah, exactly, right? They're going to lose money. See, so being able to figure out what your costs are as a business is really, really important. Even a nonprofit business like UMW. All right. Now, what you may have inferred from the story is that figuring out your costs is based on knowing your production function. In fact, behind every cost function, there is a production function because you needed to know how many engineers will it take to get this job done, right? That's a production function thing. Okay, so total cost curves. Total cost curves show for different levels of output how many dollars it's going to take to get the job done. Okay, what do we know about total cost curves? We know that the more output you want to produce, the higher the cost of producing it. educating 20,000 students is going to cost more than educating 4,000 students. It just is, because it takes more inputs in order to do that. We know a little bit more than that, actually. We know that total cost curves increase at an increasing rate. Okay, so at low levels of output, your total cost can be somewhat moderate, but eventually they just go crazy, they explode. Okay, what would it cost Mary Washington to have 20,000 students taking classes with us? Could we even handle 20,000 students? I think not. We wouldn't have the classroom space. It would be literally impossible. And because it's impossible, the cost would be almost infinite. Okay, right? So when we talk about the costs getting out of control, the costs going vertical in terms of the graph, really that's a statement about the capacity of the firm to produce their product. Okay, we'll come back to that idea later. Okay, excuse me. Just like with total product and marginal product, we have total cost and marginal cost. What's marginal cost mean? Christine, any ideas there? What's marginal cost? Anybody else?
The cost to produce one more. Of something.
Exactly, yeah. If you increase your output by 1 unit, how much do your costs go up? So just like total product is how much additional product you get from using one more worker, marginal cost is how much additional cost you get from producing one more unit of output. Okay, it is analogous. All right, if you look at the graph of marginal product and the graph of marginal cost, you will see they look like mirror images of one another. Okay, what we said earlier was marginal product may increase at first as you add workers, but then you're going to get diminishing marginal productivity. The marginal cost curve is exactly the opposite. It may go down at first when you produce more output, but then it's going to increase. Okay, again, costs and productivity are related. Okay, it's not an accident that those things turn out the way they do. The shape of the marginal cost curve is caused by the shape of the marginal product curve. In fact, the shapes of all the product curves and the cost curves are related to one another. Okay, one other thing that I wanted to talk about, and that is average cost. Okay, average cost is kind of like marginal cost, but it's not the same thing. The average cost is, average cost is the cost of the average unit of output when you're producing some quantity, like 6. Marginal cost is much more specific. Marginal cost is the cost of producing each individual item. The first item, the second item, the third item, the fourth item, the fifth item, and the sixth item. Okay, marginal and average cost are showing similar things, but they're not exactly the same. They're different angles on the same basic question. Pam actually sent me a graph today that shows this, and so I'm going to pull that up really quickly. As soon as I share my screen. All right, share this one. Okay, now this graph has more in it than we need at the moment. Let's focus on the red line and the blue line. Okay, the red line is marginal cost. It's roughly U-shaped. The blue line is average cost. It's also roughly U-shaped. Marginal cost tends to be, trying to think of the word, tighter in, so it's steeper going down and steeper going up. Average cost is stretched out a little more. They're both upside down parabolas, okay? And that's because they're both measuring similar sorts of things, okay? I usually think of the average cost curve as being a U-shape, and I usually think of the marginal cost curve as being a check mark or a Nike sign. Okay, any questions about that? You really need to know how to draw the graphs. Okay, so the way I do it is if you draw average cost first, it makes it easier. Okay, first draw your U-shape for average cost. And then you draw your marginal cost curve through the average cost curve. Now there's a trick here. Excuse me. The way to tell the difference between average and marginal cost is to use something called the marginal average rule. Every one of you knows this intuitively, even though you don't know that it's a thing or that it has a name. Okay, so let me explain it to you. You're taking a class. You've done some work. You've taken a first exam. Does this sound familiar, Morgan? Good. Okay. You now take the second exam. As a result of the second exam, your average in the course increases. What can we say about how you did on the second exam compared to your average? If the exam raises your average, it must be true that you did better on the exam than your average going in. So the exam grade pulled up your average. Do you see that? Okay, so what we say about that generally is if the average is rising, the marginal has to be above it. Similarly, if the average is falling, the marginal has to be below it. You take that exam and it pulls your average down, it must be that your exam grade was below your average. Okay, the only time when you
Will you say that again? I'm sorry.
Sure. When the average is falling, look on the graph here. When the average is falling, the marginal has to be below it. When the average is rising, the marginal has to be above it. And when you're at the bottom of the average curve, so it's neither rising nor falling, that's where marginal intersects it. So what that means is the way you draw these graphs is first you draw your blue average cost curve as a U-shape, and then you draw your marginal cost curve starting underneath and cutting through it right at the minimum point and then going above. That's it every time.
And then the green one is what?
Okay. You had to ask. No, it's okay. So we know that there are fixed costs and there are variable costs, okay? So it turns out that if you add the fixed cost and the variable cost together, you get the total cost, okay? So if you divide total cost by quantity, you get average cost, either average total cost or average variable cost. This blue line is actually average variable cost. The green line is average total cost. The difference is the average fixed cost. Okay, but notice that the marginal average rule still holds. The green line is a U-shape. Okay, the green line, marginal cost is below it to the left of the minimum point and above it to the right of the minimum point. So all those rules that I just told you still hold. All right, any questions? All right. Well, that's all I've got for tonight. So if you don't have any questions, I guess we're done.
Technology. I did have other questions and I emailed you, but it
Yeah.
might be better to talk about them next week.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. I'll just hang on because I just
Oh,
need, I was going to do
I
a quiz,
forgot.
but I'll wait until next week.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Anybody else? All right. Well, then have a good week and I'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Maybe we'll have some other visitors.